Your insiders are Dregs, Pierre, and Frank. Good news for Canadian NHL teams and anyone with a vested interest in there being actual trades on Trade Center, not to name any names. The federal government poised to reduce the mandatory 14-day quarantine for players traded to Canadian clubs down to 7. What are the repercussions, Drakes?
Well, I mean, you've got 7 happy Canadian general managers to go along with the Canadian media, no question about that. The approval is expected to mimic the national interest exemption, which was afforded to the 7 Canadian teams prior to training camp. Now, the 7-day quarantine isn't an issue because the National Hockey League tests daily, so that's not going to be a problem. What it does, though, is pretty obvious. It now gives the Canadian general managers more time to navigate through to the April 12th trade deadline. But when the news broke earlier in the day, one general manager noted, look, I don't think there's been a single trade that's been held up to this point because of the quarantine issues and the restrictions in Canada.
But if the market does swing a little more open to the Canadian clubs, let's look at the Edmonton Oilers. What might be at the top of their priority list, Frank?
Well, James, it might not be splashy, but I think the Edmonton Oilers have their eye on a very specific piece at a very specific price. That's a right shot center who can take face-offs and win them on the penalty kill, where they've struggled this year, just 42% shorthanded. That could help their kill. So who fits that bill? Well, how about Luke Glendening, who's not coming back to the Detroit Red Wings? He's a guy that leads the league in face-off percentage this season, can also kill penalties, and has a cheap cap hit. There's 2 other guys that don't require a 7-day quarantine, and that would be Vancouver's Brandon Sutter and Calgary's Derek Ryan, although they have higher cap hits, more cap gymnastics there. And the price, well, the Oilers have traded their 2nd, 3rd, and 5th round picks, so they'd like to do all of that for a 4th round pick if they can. We'll see what kind of magic Ken Holland has up his sleeve.
And on to a prominent name from your trade board, Frank, and that's Kyle Palmieri. Before we know he's definitely getting dealt, we have to know that he's not getting signed. He's a pending UFA. The Devils have had talks recently with his camp, and both sides, I'm told, struggling to find what is common ground on a contract in this flat cap environment and so much uncertainty of what contracts are going to look like looking forward. So things can change, but all things being equal, more likely that Palmieri gets dealt before April 12th.
Pierre, the North Division's first real schedule headache this season with the Habs games being canceled this week, implications for the Oilers and for the Senators. But the NHL has figured it out?
Yeah, so the NHL has sent in the dates to especially the 2 teams that are involved, Edmonton and Montreal. Ken Holland and Mark Bergevin have the rescheduled games in front of them. They have the matrix. But the NHL wants to wait before announcing and making that official because, of course, they want to wait till Montreal gets the full clear here in their COVID situation. So we may not hear about it for a while. In the meantime, as it stands now, if Montreal gets back to playing next Tuesday against Ottawa, the reschedule for the North Division sees a game or 2 on May 11th, which is the latest the schedule maker has gone so far in his makeup games. It means that the playoffs could still start by the 13th. That's not too much of a delay.
With the COVID variants and the pace of vaccine, it's hard to know where we'll be in a few weeks, let alone a few months. But any idea what the draft, now that we know it will happen, will look like, Frank?
Yeah, James, the NHL plans to conduct it virtually once again, but that's with all 32 teams, including Seattle, operating from their own war rooms in their home cities. But they'd like to do something special, perhaps from a centralized site, maybe even outdoors, who knows, to get the top prospects there and make it a day that they'll remember with the NHL brass, but all teams in their home cities.
Well, and look, now that the draft has been determined and it's staying in July, the National Hockey League wants to take a better look at a prospects event. And this is interesting. It could happen in early July. The logistics are just being talked about. With all the restrictions, it'll be in Canada, but is it Toronto? Nobody really knows. But it will combine some things. They'll have a combine type of event, and they'll also potentially have a 3-team round robin as part of it as well. It's all the top draft eligibles working together, but a lot to comb through at this stage.
Sympathy for the prospects, many of whom haven't even played, and sympathy for the scouts who have to make these big decisions without seeing much from these players.